Today's episode is brought to you by the Vegas Bear Guys and 2AT Fitness. The Everything Sequel podcast contains explicit language. You have been forewarned. The How Dare You Awards. Joining me, the man putting me in the room to explain the entire plot, Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions. Say hello, Tom.
Cross out butler and put head butler.
There are so many subtle jokes in this movie that I find sublime. I just greatly admire all aspects of the comedy in this movie.
Yeah, and again, that interplay of, wordplay with visual comedy and a character comedy as well. That's something that I think Sellers really innovated, or like so many of the jokes are character based.
Yeah.
Jokes like the thinking you've heard someone say something joke, which is a runner in the movie. Like the several times in the movie where he goes, "What did you say?" and no one has said anything, and that's a character joke. That's funny because of who Clouseau is, and because there's a narrative going on in Clouseau's mind that isn't real in the world. It's just all going on in his head.
Right, it's only in his head.
The conversation's already taking place in his head, and that's such a great bit of character comedy because it only makes sense in the context of that characterization.
Well, and you're quotable too. I mean, you're quotable as a character.
Definitely.
Comedic joke because it's playing on the idea of his authority.
Yeah.
The idea that's in his head. The idea that you have to write, like you've written down butler, and you have to cross that out and put head butler.
Yeah.
But he's saying it with such conviction of, this way is right, that way is wrong.
Yeah.
Change it. Kind of.
It's the style, it's the style of detection with none of the content of actual detection. And yet at the same time, what this movie, I think, really articulates about the Clouseau character that certainly Inspector Clouseau missed and kind of gets lost. You only see it in spots in the remaining two movies that we're doing, is the idea of Clouseau as an idiot savant. The idea that his reasoning is flawed and foolish, but his conclusions are correct.
All right. Yes.
Yeah. The best example of that is in Pink Panther Strikes Again, but this is the most sustained version of that.
Throughout
this movie,
The other two movies, it's different. It has to do with how he thwarts attacks through chance and accident.
So true. But with this, with this one, there's a sense that he's gonna get to, he's gonna take a circuitous route, but he will actually get to the right conclusions.
Well, what's great though is to skip to the end is the huge payoff at the end.
Yeah,
I'm gonna save it for now, but the manner in which the mystery plays out, followed by the most sublime look down the barrel of a camera.
Yeah,
but we'll get there when we get there.
And it's, it goes back to, I say classic comedy, but I was, I guess, pre-classic comedy, the fools of Shakespeare, they knew what was going on, even though they were outwardly foolish. And there's a similar thing, all the way through to the protagonists of Bertolt Brecht's plays, they're like the wrong people for the job, but they make the right calls. It's the same here. It's like there's never a sense that he's not exactly the right person to be conducting this investigation. It's just that you have to put up with a lot along the way to get there. In a sense, he's no different from like Monk or
right.
You know what I mean? Or House or these detectives. You got to put up with a lot of bullshit one way or another, but you're gonna get. He's the only person who can actually solve this.
The mystery will be solved.
Yeah. Exactly. He's got to go to a toilet and get weird about the toilets in every episode.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking A Shot in the Dark. I would tell you when the movie was released, but I'm not sure, Tom, because I have two dates. One is June 23rd of 1964, which I think was the American release, but I also have January 29th of 1965, which might be the England release.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's usually how it goes. To get us all excited over in our tiny island about what one of our most famous exports has been up to.
Yeah, exactly. So at any rate, I have those two dates, but it's directed by Blake Edwards.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna space out all my Blake Edwards references.
Very
For
wise.
now, I'll just ruin your day, and I will tell you that he has directed 8 Pink Panther movies. And that's all I'll let out of the bag for now.
Oh, dear God.
But this movie, of these 4 movies, I mean, it's the high watermark, 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. There is no information on a budget or an opening weekend, but in the USA and the world, it made $12.6 million. And I imagine at this time, the budget was certainly under 5. It was probably a $2 million movie, is my guess.
Yeah.
Based on, like, what I'm looking at for the budget of the other movies. Or that kind of...
Yeah. It looks glorious as well.
It looks great.
Production value is really high, both cinematically and in terms of set design as well.
Agreed. All right, well, where to start? We got the MGM logo. Oh, here's an interesting fact.
Yeah.
Do you know one of the credited writers on this movie?
I when I saw it, I nearly jumped out of my seat. There was many collaborators that I was expecting to have co-written this with Blake Edwards. You know, I would have expected to see a Mel Brooks or a Mike Nichols or a Woody Allen. William
but not
Peter
the writer
Blatty,
of The Exorcist.
author of The Exorcist and director of Exorcist 3, was not chief among those candidates. I have to tell you now.
Yeah.
And I'm still not quite sure what his particular set of
Skill set.
contributions was to the script, except for the extremely dark ending of the movie and homicidal turn of Dreyfus. That's the only part of the movie that seems
so
to...
funny.
Yeah, I mean, I guess everyone's got to come from somewhere, right?
That's
I mean,
really good.
You've got to do your apprenticeship. You've got to write Peter Sellers comedy movies so you can eventually graduate to writing religious horror novels.
Yeah, exactly. That really got me.
Me too. But I mean, this movie has a pre-title sequence in the style of most sequels.
It literally it starts with a shot in the dark.
Yeah, and this is basically, we have several minutes of famous British character actors theatrically galloping around a country house at night, which,
sneaking around.
I mean, if you want to visually indicate that you're about to watch a murder mystery, there's really no better way to do it than this.
This is the way. Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things I was thinking about as I started watching it. And it's, it was, I think you were just mentioning on our Patreon, the Casino Royale, kind of the chamber drama. Aspect, and that's what this feels like. The beginning and the end of this movie are going to feel very Agatha Christie.
Yeah, and it was a stage play before it was a movie.
That really surprised me too, seeing that it was a stage play first, and then they sort of readapted it to Clouseau.
It didn't surprise me, having watched this pre-title sequence, because it's but interestingly, and this is where Blake Edwards cinematic prowess comes into play, it feels like a hybrid of stage and film. So you can imagine this as a stage play.
Absolutely.
But it's also elevated into cinema by the fluidity of the camera work. By a director who knows how and when to move the camera. But you can see the legacy of theater in this sequence. But
it was starting to remind me of Halloween.
Yeah, or Rear Window as well as the other.
Rear Window. In terms of that fluidity, the way it was moving.
Reference.
Yeah.
Completely, yeah. And, even earlier Hitchcock, like Rope, because
Hmm.
You know, this is I suspect it's not one long take, but it's designed to look like that,
Yeah,
a la
right.
what Hitchcock did in Rope. So it's lots of cleverly disguised cuts, if there are cuts there. And you know, this is my note was we're still in an era where making a popular comedy doesn't negate filmic innovation.
Right. Yeah.
Like it
You can
doesn't
have
matter
both.
that the you can have both, and in this incarnation, one enhances the other.
Absolutely.
But it's a great, given that this is a stage play, like they make all the right moves in terms of, uh, like adhering to the legacy, the theatrical legacy it comes from, but transforming that into something more cinematic as well. That's a tightrope, and this movie carries it really well.
Agreed. And then we hear the shot in the
And then we get
dark,
to the best part.
and
Yeah, we hear the shot in the dark, and we go to the best part of all of these movies, which is the cartoon titles.
but now Clouseau is the center of the cartoon
Yeah.
titles instead of the actual Pink Panther.
Yeah, Clouseau, like it announces that Clouseau is now the connective tissue of the series, and I think this is the most, and I guess even more than that, this is that given that the Pink Panther kind of became a children's cartoon eventually, this feels more like an adult cartoon. This is very Fritz the Cat with the can legs and the Python-esque surrealism.
Hmm.
Like it's comic art for grown-ups who like a bit of risque humor.
Right.
And
Right.
I think the music speaks to that as well, because it,
Well, Henry Mancini, I mean,
but it's very different from the original Pink Panther scene. It's more avant-garde, it's dirtier
absolutely.
jazz.
Can I ask you
Um,
something straight off
yeah,
the bat about the music?
yeah.
Did you notice that there are certain intonations, certain beats, not beats, but certain instruments that sound almost exactly like the Nightmare on Elm Street music?
No, I did not notice that, but I'm
Go
trying to
back.
figure out whether that is true or whether that is your limited frame of reference when it comes to music. Right now
Could be either,
I'm
but
I'm
I
wavering
think I
between
have.
I'm wavering between the two. You've either
I
got a
think I
very
have.
good point.
I think I have a deep pull here, sir.
Yeah, I sure. I'll buy that for $1.
Okay.
Absolutely. But the you know, I think this is a severely underrated theme. Like they only used it for this one movie, but
Yeah.
it's, to me, it's as memorable and as accomplished as the actual Pink Panther scene.
Panther music,
Pink Panther
right.
theme, but it's like one is very refined jazz, the other is more kind of bolshy, dirty jazz. So I like the contrast as well, and it's the same composer, so
I kept waiting for the other tune that never came,
yeah.
and
Yeah,
kept
I mean,
thinking
again, at this
this
point,
movie,
they don't.
but this music's great.
Yeah, it's like, well, it's like this music. Yeah, this music's great, and also, you know, there's no attachment to the Pink Panther music. It's like we don't think that the Pink Panther is gonna mean anything to anyone at this point.
Yeah, right, right.
It's not to be celebrated nostalgically yet.
Agreed.
Yeah, and then, you know, the cold open and the title of and the titles, 9 minutes of this 100-minute movie.
Yeah,
So right from the get go, even though I think this is this doesn't feel as long as some of the later movies do,
right.
Blake Edwards is clearly someone who makes movies that have sections that feel longer than they should.
Then
for
they
what
should
are.
be.
Yes.
Yeah.
For what
And
they
on
are.
top of that,
Crucially.
from what I've read, all of these movies are way shorter than he wanted them to be.
Well, that's ludicrous.
Some of these later movies had 2.5-hour cuts that were cut down. This movie's an hour and 42 minutes.
You know what's great? You know what I love about that is that if Blake Edwards had have made films in a different era, he would have been the Judd Apatow of his time, making these overwrought, overlong
Funny
comedy
people,
movies.
Two
But
and a half
because he
hour long
existed in a
movies.
period of cinema where common sense prevailed, no fucker is gonna let him do this.
The studios were in charge.
Yeah.
You're going to cut that movie down to an hour and 42, sir.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it can feel, his movies, all of them can feel flabby
Yeah.
Essentially, he's got one thing to do in a scene, and he tends to take a very long time to do it.
I actually, we already did our ranking episode, of course, but that was my other strike against The Return. That movie was just way too long for me.
I can't disagree with that.
Yeah.
And I won't.
Fine.
So my first note is we're straight in with Dreyfuss, and this is where I realized that Dreyfuss's philandering wasn't merely an invention of John Cleese.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I thought the
It's
same
essential
thing.
to the character.
I said
I was
he's
like,
introduced.
John Cleese did that because he's a notorious philanderer, but no.
My note was he's introduced as the sleaze that John Cleese was supposed to be later. Yeah.
It's so interesting as well, like, the how clever the movie is about giving you reasons to dislike Dreyfuss, even when logic dictates that he should be on the side of right.
Of right, yeah,
and
exactly.
He should be the most relatable character, but because of how they write him and because of how Herbert Lom plays him, he's kind of already at very least an anti-hero. Yeah. Before he becomes a supervillain in later movies. Well, to be honest, even at the end of this movie, he's kind of a supervillain.
Yeah, he is. But didn't you think too that it's funny when you're watching a movie from 1964 and sort of the sensibilities of 1964 and sort of that idea of like they're just going for the joke. They just want the juxtaposition. You think he's talking to his wife. It turns out he's talking to his lover. And then he tells somebody to tell his wife to hold or whatever.
And that was the part John Cleese remembered from this movie.
From this
for
movie,
obvious reasons.
But I always wonder if they really just wanted the joke, or was that intentional towards his villainy?
It's difficult to say because they retcon that only to re-retcon it a movie later. So I think it is a case of they don't know what direction they want to take it in, and I think they eventually realize, what we did originally was the way we should have always gone with Dreyfuss. But there's a bump in the road where he's reintroduced to normal society, even though he's murdered several people.
Yes, right. And there's a misogyny within that, like, a philandering husband, the guy who always cheats on his wife, that just felt just like, fun. Well, that's just what we do. It's exactly. You can't blame him. It's all just good times.
It's Mad Men times,
Exactly right. And so to me, it was this blind spot that they didn't realize that they were just going for the joke, most likely. But
there's a few of those with a few different issues in this movie.
Sure.
I was reminded of the pilot of Frasier and the creators of Frasier who talked about how easy it was to get a laugh just by mentioning someone's name. Because all Dreyfuss says is Clouseau. And it's funny, right?
Yeah.
So it's trading on what we already know to get a laugh. And they did this in the pilot of Frasier. Like, Frasier got a laugh just by mentioning Lilith.
Right.
So when you're doing a sequel or a spin-off, you can get a laugh just from what people know about the character without actually having to craft a joke.
Sure.
You just have to make the reference. And that's one of the ways in which, you can manipulate sequels. You can manipulate what the audience have already gone through and seen with characters in sequels in a way you can't with other forms of...
Well, and then on top of that, with Herbert Lom's performance, you're going to start getting the facial tics.
Yes.
Whenever Clouseau is mentioned as Dreyfuss, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And his physical comedy work in this movie, well, all these movies, really. I mean, to the point where it's going to be his twitching eye that disappears in the last movie we're going to talk about. That's how focused on his physical comedy for these sequels we are.
Yeah, completely.
But here, it's like the beginning of it, right? It's just starting.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, it's just starting, and yet it kind of seems it's sort of fully formed.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to keep going back to this and quite rightly, because it's a great performance is a great performance forever.
Sure.
And you know, I love the fact that Clouseau goes, he's straight in that fountain. There's no
Falls right
pretense of
in.
trying to build the joke or
Nope.
like setting it up beforehand. It's just bam in the fountain, and I love when slapstick does that, when they let you know that they have no pretense about the joke they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Think about Steve Martin
Yeah,
walking around that mansion for 90 minutes, trying to get in, and
completely.
how labored all of that feels, as opposed
Exactly.
to,
Yeah.
not only that, he just falls into the fountain, and then you can get residual jokes out of it for the next 10 minutes. Just think about his squishy shoes, the Foley work
Yeah.
on.
But I mean that's great, because essentially you're doing a murder mystery fairly straight, and the kind of but with one kind of comedic exception, which is that he's soaking wet while he's asking all the questions.
While he's asking all these
And-
questions, so he's
and so
already
just that
branded
one-
a fool.
That one sidestep into comedy is enough to sustain the entire sequence.
The
to
entire
point where
scene, exactly.
You don't have to comicalize anything. Just that idea, that one comic idea, means you can play the rest of the scene entirely straight. And yeah,
But that doesn't mean they're not still writing jokes. This moment where
no,
when somebody says, "Would you like to examine the body?" and he says, "I would be delighted."
yeah,
It's like if you let that pass over you, you don't realize what a sublimely written joke that is.
yeah,
I
Definitely.
really appreciate, because there's at least a good half dozen to a dozen of those types of lines in this movie that I really, really adore.
completely. And what I think, you know, this wasn't the reason I put it at the top of my list, but it easily could have been, is how straight they're playing the murder mystery elements, because, you know, Clouseau is only a slight comic step to the left of Hercule Poirot.
Right.
Like everything that Poirot stands for, Clouseau also stands for. It's just a tiny step to the left.
The methods are different. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And even they talk about, one of the oldest conventions of mystery storytelling, which is the locked door mystery.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of it's like, if the door was locked, how did the murderer
How did they get in
there? And I'm like, that's to have those kind of genre bones on your film
Yeah.
really makes a huge difference for your legitimacy. The legitimacy of the comedy
Absolutely.
you're doing.
And I think we talked about this in the ranking episode, but each of these movies are going to kind of glom onto a genre, and how well they stick or adhere to it matters. And this movie sticks to it really well.
Yeah,
the idea
it
of the
does.
murder mystery, and that's one of the reasons it works so well.
Yeah. Oh, completely.
Because that's it. That is this movie's true north. Is that?
And the playing the other kind of success of this scene. Well, there's also the parody of romantic fiction in these scenes. When he meets what's her name?
Sure.
Elsa.
Maria Gambrelli, right?
Yes.
That's Elke Summer.
Elke Summer, the violins, the kind of
Absolutely.
perfume. He said, what a beautiful perfume. She says bath oil. That we kind of play again. We're sort of in different genre sandboxes,
Yeah.
but playing it fairly straight with only a slight heightening for the sake of comedy, which is exactly where these movies really excel. But it also made me think about what kind of an influence a movie like this must have been on the Zuckers.
Sure.
Because we're immediately into the foreground background disparity.
Yeah. Right.
Like we make our comment because we've got the smoke bellowing from his coat,
the back of his yeah. Right.
Yeah, from his coat, while there's this romantic scene going on in the foreground. And everything you said when we did Hot Shots Part 2 about the president's
Right. All of that's here.
shots with the news reporter in the foreground. Like you feel like they really, although they said they took it from Harold and Maude, but which is probably also true.
Mm.
I guess we're not too far away from Harold and Maude at this point either.
Right.
And I love the different levels of comedy in these scenes, like the dramatic irony
Me
between
too.
what the character knows and what the audience what the audience knows. So he thinks Clouseau thinks he's cleaned all of his nose.
Yes.
Right? When his nose is covered in
and the continuity of keeping it under his nose the way they do after he wipes it off.
Yeah. Right, exactly. He thinks he's wiped all of it off, but there's still some there. So then the joke becomes, he thinks he's cleaned it, but the audience knows that there's still, and everyone around knows that there's still a little bit there. And that's a joke with many gradients.
Yes, right. And there's so many different levels of comedy because he's trying to retain his authority. And so when something goes awry, sometimes it's commented on, sometimes it's not.
Yes.
So you have those levels. When it's when it's the cream on the nose, the idea of him turning around quickly, and trying to get it off his nose, and he thinks he's got it all off, but he doesn't. And then there are ones that just pass by. Your quotable kind of referenced this when he uses the pen to pick up the firearm, to pick up the gun, and he smells it, and he says, "This pen has been fired recently."
This pen is...
And it's just one of those verbal comedy things where he's gotten the word wrong, but nobody comments on it. But then you have the joke of your quotable coming right after it. I mean, so...
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just working on all kinds of different levels comedically, and to me, it's sort of the genius of Blake Edwards.
Yeah.
Again, how he's framing this entire scene.
Yeah. And, the art of kind of tracking a joke through a movie as well is articulated here because, he's going to fall in the water a lot, but then occasionally it's going to subvert your expectations and he's just going to land on the ground next to the water.
Yeah, right.
So, and then the next time we see him, he will go in the water, so it's like... I get the sense that every joke has been thought about over the course and how it works over the course of the movie. Like it's never in isolation. It's never just for a laugh at that moment. It's always about how is this going to work in the bigger canvas of the movie.
In the broader scene, yeah.
Yeah.
I love when he calls that guy a fool and says he could kill him with a karate chop.
Yeah.
And I started wondering about, because, we'll get to Kato when we get to Kato. But I wondered, because this is
I forgot that Kato was this early. I really
Me too.
That Kato was this
I really
early.
thought Kato was going to come later.
I wasn't expecting him till the 70s.
Yep. I had the same exact thought. And then I wondered, in 1964, do you think that they were trying to get comedy out of a white man doing karate? Would that have been inherently funny to that? To the culture in that time?
That's not real. I don't know if there's consensus on this, but the first time a white person ever did martial arts in a movie, as I understand it, was Spencer Tracy in Bad Day at Black Rock, and I think that was within years of this movie, so...
Okay.
Probably.
Interesting.
No, I think so. I think absolutely that and that gag grows as the martial arts cinema grows, and you can throw in more parodies.
The gag gets bigger, right?
But at this point, I think it is just like, look at this hopeless Westerner trying to do karate, and then later the joke becomes, how much of martial arts cinema can we send up in these sequences in a sort of almost proto Tarantino way.
Well, and one other thing I like about this movie is, this will be a theme throughout all these movies, but the push and pull of his ineptitude and the trouble that gets him in at home. So he is taken off the case, but then circumstances require him being put back on the case.
Yeah.
The push and pull with all of that through this movie, I think, is really good. I think it's the best they do it in all of these movies is in this one.
Agreed. Also, Peter Sellers doesn't need a double act, but he has a really good one here with him and Graham Stark. I have no idea, given that he was clearly available, why they didn't continue this partnership.
Yeah, right.
Given that he appears in Return of the Pink Panther and Pink Panther Strikes Again as different characters, I have no idea why they didn't. Maybe it was Peter Sellers who put up a fight, but they work so well together as a double act.
Yeah.
And Blake Edwards does that amazing thing of like again, his comedy instincts and his knowledge of how to do screen comedy is unsurpassed. because he immediately, whenever they're on screen, takes it into a mid shot, right? Which is how all the great double act comedy is done. Laurel and Hardy, it's always in mid shot, so you can have a continuous take, and whatever they do in the take is in the film.
Is there,
you
right?
Can see all of their acts, so they immediately goes to mid shot with these two actors, and it feels like a Laurel and Hardy routine whenever they're on screen together. So I'm baffled as to why, when they're bringing everyone back, they still bring Graham Stark back, but decide they want to cast him as different characters each time. I don't get it. It's a strange, given how successful the character is in this movie. Maybe it was Peter Sellers didn't want a sidekick. Like, comic artists are very weird about that.
I do know that in the later movies, they kept, like, Peter Sellers wanted him around, and his behavior was so erratic that Blake Edwards needed to have 3 actors in particular around him, even if they're in different roles for these movies.
But why not as this character? Why not as this police
I don't know.
officer? I don't understand.
But I also, because I thought it was interesting, because his character name is Hercule, and so all of a sudden, my bells went off for Poirot as well.
Yeah.
I thought that might come into play at some point. I mean, it doesn't. This character is not like that character, but anyway.
But arguably the best joke in this movie, and that's a high bar, is the two of them later on with the watches. So
very funny.
I mean, that's really good use of the double act, and I don't know. It just seems like a missed opportunity to me, given that this works so well. But I also get that, Peter Sellers might have wanted it to be very much a solo performance.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's the whole reason Niven is not in this movie. Because
interesting,
the original Pink Panther was supposed to be really more a Niven-driven kind of story. And then with Peter Sellers' kind of comedic genius at play, he felt like he was shunted to the side a little bit. So this is a
spin-off, essentially.
This is essentially, yeah, exactly.
That's really interesting. And I never put that together, that this is really more of a spin-off than a sequel.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, we're about to get attacked in bed while wearing your karate clothes. Why don't we take a break?
I'll just let you know ahead of time. My note is Kato! ! It should have also been a question mark as well. Kato?
Yes, exactly. I was not expecting to see him so early in this franchise, but it was accompanied by, again, fall out of my seat laughter that there's a man who just sleeps in his karate clothes.
I like to think I know something about beer, but nowadays even I get overwhelmed when confronted by the exhaustive selection of craft beers they have at bars, breweries, and even grocery stores. Back in the day you had 1, maybe 2 craft beers to choose from, and if you were confused, you ordered a Guinness. But in beerstinations like San Diego, the craft beer options lately are in double, sometimes even triple digits. So what's a beer drinker to do? You need what I need, the Vegas Beer Guys. Your beer of choice should be a perfect blend of malt and hops. And so a live show about beer needs that same balance. And the Vegas Beer Guys matches beer expert Dan Aker with self-proclaimed beer novice Stephen J. Weiss. The results are eminently drinkable. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram. They'll try new beers, they'll tell you about beer. Think of them as your beer Sherpas guiding you up a foamy-headed mountain to reach the peak of your pint. God, I need a beer.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Kato! !
That's where we are.
As Tom said on the way out.
I bet that's what it looked like in the screenplay as well.
Kato attacks. And they do this throughout the series. But one of the things that I think works the best in this movie is that every attack ends with a phone call.
It's a great gag.
It's a great running gag. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I don't really have much more to say about it. I mean, it's kind of a I guess a lampooning of some, obviously the of martial arts, of the kind of the fear around Asia in general. The idea of the sort of, the not the well, it is the red under the bed, but it's also the yellow under the bed.
Yeah, right.
It's playing on those fears. It's playing on martial arts and Bond films as well. I mean, Burt Kwok been in a couple of those by this point.
Sure.
So it's kind of, it's Orientalism, but it's parody at the same time. Like, you're never quite sure how to feel about it, but it is also incredibly funny, and I think its comic instincts are good.
Yes, I agree with that.
And that's what makes some of the more problematic issues around it kind of secondary.
Right.
And that might be an overstatement, but at the same time, it's what I feel.
Yeah, I mean, even the end of the fight, when the fight is over, and he's getting a call from Dreyfus, and he's back on the case, and he's telling Kato he's back on the case, but then he gives him a serious punch to the stomach and then a knee to the face when he keels over from the punch to the stomach. And although that looks like the meanest, worst thing one person could do to another person, comedically it works because the physical comedy of it from the two actors actually is funny and works.
Yeah, I agree.
So
that's it. I mean, I think that's it. It's the levels of comic performance that really elevate it, and the same goes for the following scene, which is your standard exposition recap scene in a mystery drama.
The fact speech.
Yeah, and what's great about this is it's not only is it sort of a kind of version of what you would get from a detective in a mystery drama. It's not the words themselves that are comedic. It's all about the delivery. Like everything he's saying, like this is, you could play this as drama if you wanted to. These words would play just as well as drama.
Exactly right.
It's all about context. It's all about the emphasis and the performance around it. Like it's genuine kind of mystery storytelling, just kind of with these fringes of comedy around that kind of steal focus away from that, from how straight it is.
I also kind of take a look at, it would be easy to call some of the comedy a hat on a hat because the reason it
sometimes
works
literally.
Yeah. Because within his speech about talking about the facts, he's also going to break his pointer stick.
Yes.
Which would seem like too much, but because you're taking the fact point so seriously, it never will feel like that.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And that's why it works.
It also works because it's the double act logic is sound, so the idea that these two people represent different kinds of stupidity and different levels of power within the hierarchy.
Right.
It's like they're at different times they're smarter than each other. And that's how great double acts work. That's how Laurel and Hardy work. They're just different kinds of stupid.
Yep.
And the comedy is all based on that. So yeah, it works. It's a fantastic scene. But a scene that could easily play as drama in another movie gives it that almost airplane quality, right? Taking actual lines out of the movies you're parodying.
You're parodying.
Yeah, and the one of the things again I admire about this movie is that it's like any other good movie in that it has themes. So the theme of the dark is all over this movie. So, even just falling over in the dark. It's like, just because it's a comedy doesn't mean it can't have themes and visual imagery, and it does. So the idea of the dark is all over this movie.
Yep. Is he with Hercule? There's a bit where he's following out of the office and then somebody, and then Maria slips into the office while he's not expecting it, and that whole bit.
This is very Laurel and Hardy.
Very much so, yes, exactly.
They did a sketch. I don't know if you saw Stan and Ollie, the biopic with Steve Coogan and who played Oliver?
John C. Reilly.
Which
I did.
I mean, the most amazing.
It's great.
John C. Reilly
great
transforms into Oliver Hardy really quite eerily. But could they do? There's a sketch they did live. I don't know if they ever did it on film, but the train station sketch where they keep missing each other at a train station, and this feels like an adaptation of that.
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
That works on the same comedic principles. But again, like, you know, this is this solid base of great comedy that they're working from. They're just like missing each other in the corridor again and again.
I kept thinking it felt like the visual equivalent of Who's on First.
Yeah, it absolutely.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
If you were to play that verbally, yeah, that's exactly what it would be. And then another, you know, another comedic art form, the one-sided phone call, which, as
Sure.
we know from Doctor Strangelove, Sellers is the master of.
He's great at, right?
The greatest of all time in that movie, and this one's pretty good too. You know, he's good at this one-sided phone call, and you know, this is the beef I have about kind of when slapstick's done badly. As it's not in this movie.
Oh, I
When
was
he
going to
rips-
say, wait, are we going to
Well,
fight?
but it's a point of contrast, because when he rips his pants in the closing
Right.
scene, the thing that makes it land, that makes the joke land, is not the fact that, oh look, his underwear's exposed. It's just the mundane of seeing a little bit of his hairy leg. That's the thing that like it rips in a way that you just get this really uneven bit of hairy leg out of it. It's so mundane, that detail. That's what makes it funny. It's not the fact that, oh look, he's in his under. I mean, that's obviously
it's part of it, but yeah,
that's the
I
overview
understand
of
what
the
you're
joke.
saying.
But what actually makes it funny is that, you know, I think every great bit of slapstick should land with you like something that's actually happens to you on a daily basis.
Right, that's what I was just thinking. Right.
So like, what, you know, when I'm walking past the door and my shirt sleeve gets caught on the door, on a nail on the door, and I'm trying to get away from it, that's what slapstick comedy should be.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's that combination of something that happens to you every day that is also extraordinary and unbelievable and ridiculous.
Yeah.
And if you can combine those two things, that's where
Well-
the heart of slapstick lies. Nothing that Stan Laurel ever did in Laurel and Hardy feels like outrageous to me. Like, it's like I can imagine myself falling into a pile of dishes at any given time.
Absolutely. But on top of it, what I like about a scene like this is that we've already established that Clouseau is in the room with someone he's feeling amorous towards. So
Yeah.
he's trying to remain cool within that. And despite the fact that he's going to rip his trousers, and then the woman he's basically already fallen in love with will rip his coat sleeve.
Yeah.
And then the character work he gets to do of trying to remain calm, cool, and collected within that.
Yeah.
And it's great because there are moments where Blake Edwards lets him get behind a desk and sit down or whatever. So the pants thing is hidden. But when he relaxes and forgets what had happened and he gets up and walks back, you get to see it again.
Yeah.
And so he looks all the more foolish in the comedy. You know, it's like you get that first joke a second time, and it's just as funny the second time because of that. It's great.
And speaking of the pacing of it all, and I had a similar moment to what you had, where you're like, am I remembering this because am I remembering this from the movie, or is the movie telling me this? And both are fine. I actually think I think it's a skillful piece of comedic film direction, because we established the globe in the room long before he gets his hand stuck in it, like minutes before. We keep, every time the camera goes along, we see, you know, the globe is prominent in the shot every time they go back and forth. So obviously I know there's a physical globe gag coming up, so
Sure.
I can't disassociate from that. But I do think what Blake Edwards is doing is kind of like he's telegraphing the joke in a very skillful way. Like he's directing the audience's eye towards this globe, because it's going to be the kind of comic button of the scene, and it needs to be an established prop in the room that's prominent in your eye line before that happens. So I think it's
it goes beyond that, Tom, because there's a globe joke in the first movie too.
Oh, I don't remember that. Well,
and he does the same thing where he spins the globe and he puts his hand on it and he just he just carries him over and he falls down.
Yeah. So it's a
And
callback
so
too.
on top of it, you have a callback and sequel one-upmanship where
There you
instead
go.
of falling down, he gets his hand stuck.
Oh, it's even more masterful then.
Yeah.
This is where we get. It's at the end of this scene that we get the hard cut to the police van that we've already.
Yeah, right. Because he
Talked
releases
about.
her to follow her,
Yeah.
and he can't even get 5 steps away from the police building before he keeps
Yeah.
getting himself arrested. And he learns no lessons,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is really funny.
And then this is about, and then we get a second murder. So we get comedy out of repeating all the investigative set pieces. The comedy is that we have a comedy of repetition. We have to do all this again, and he goes through the same motions again, and it's hilarious.
Yep.
Because it's not the movie repeating itself. It's Clouseau repeating itself because he's reinvestigating.
Right. and he gets arrested because he doesn't have a license to sell his balloons, and his solution to that problem is to paint, and then he gets rearrested because
Yeah.
he doesn't have the license to paint. It's very funny.
And this is the beginnings of all the different disguises
Mhm.
that he'll have in the subsequent movies. But at this point, it's kind of restrained, and I love the fact that it's sort of he's in disguise, but the joke is not to do it with the disguise at all. It's to do with him getting arrested in the hard cut to
Right.
the police van. So I like that they set that up and then kind of dash your expectations there.
Well, on top of that, we're going to stick to the genre form, because in the middle of all of these scenes is the scene where the gardener is blackmailing.
Yeah.
What's his name? What's the character's name? Ballon, right?
I don't know
Benjamin
what the
Ballon?
character name is. I mean, George Sanders.
George Sanders. Yeah.
Who is a great straight man in this movie.
Great,
to
very
Peter
good.
Sellers. I'm so glad they got someone of that esteem
Yeah.
as an actor. It feels like Groucho Marx and Margaret Dumont, even though she didn't really know what was going on. And I think George Sanders very much does, but it's a similar kind of like, playing off this sort of upper class
Right.
sort of nonchalance and not really knowing what's happening.
But within that, I mean, we already talked about that front investigation scene, but when Clouseau enters his home and you're just watching Sanders take Clouseau in,
Yeah.
not speaking, the way he's looking at him, the way everything
Yeah.
about that performance reads comedically, but honest. And honest
Completely.
to what he's seeing. And what he's seeing is ridiculous. It's great.
He was so good at that. I mean, his performance in All About Eve and even Rebecca,
Sure.
is the only good thing about that fucking movie.
Another hot take from Tom Stewart.
I love Alfred Hitchcock. I love George Sanders. I hate Laurence Olivier's film acting.
Wow.
Oh yeah,
We'll add it to the list.
probably
let me
the
just
worst
write
film
that
actor of all.
down.
Probably the worst film actor of all time. if
Hates
inverse
Laurence
proportionality,
Olivier.
if inverse proportionality to how good he was supposed to have been on stage is a measure, then he must be the worst film actor of all time.
Wow.
Only person to give a bad performance in a Powell and Pressburger film. That's all I'm saying. In fact, I didn't say that. David Mamet said that, but I'm happy to quote it.
So you're on the side of David Mamet.
Once again, to my
Dangerous
detriment.
ground, friend.
It is dangerous.
ground.
Well, I feel on the subject of acting, I'm on safe ground. If it strays into women or
Right.
politics or anything else, we might be in trouble. Well, I mean, we're leading into the billiards scene here, which is
Very
precision
good.
prop comedy of the highest quality. I mean, a young Carrot Top must have reveled over
It's
this.
going nuts.
Gallagher would be drooling over his watermelons. Yeah, and Sanders kind of, you've already said this, but his deadpan participation in the comedy is what makes it. I mean, not
Yeah.
that Peter Sellers doesn't make it by himself, but it needs that extra dimension of him looking like he's getting caught up in the prop comedy,
Right.
when in fact he's kind of in charge of it as much as Sellers is.
He hands him that curved pool cue.
He does, and they have a great moment where he gets kind of stuck inside a triangle.
Yeah.
And I just think about
that was an amazing piece of physical comedy from
It
the
is-
two
yeah.
of them.
That's what I mean, yeah. And there's
It
an
was
outtake
so
of
funny.
that, which shows that they had to do it a lot to get it right as well.
On top of that, Blake Edwards is giving fantastic shots of the rest of the help in the house watching that scene unfold.
Mm-hmm.
Butler watching, maid watching, maybe cook, I forget who else, but
Yeah.
you have at the door, just behind the door on the stairs watching.
Yeah.
And he goes back to it several times. It's a great framing shot.
Yeah, and and I love that we get him falling in the water again.
Yes.
and the police van runner, so it's like this conflation of all the best running gags of the movie kind of working with each other to create a kind of a super gag, a super runner.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a masterclass in feature-length film comedy, right? I mean, this is how you structure jokes across the course of a movie. They've got it. They've pinned it down. My next note is about how the movie tells you it's going to a nudist colony without telling you it's going to a nudist colony.
Yeah.
They make no actual reference to it.
Nope.
But there is no doubt in your mind that he is heading to a nudist colony. Camp Sunshine, I believe, is what they call it. As soon as they said that, I was like, all right, it's a nudist colony. I mean, I don't remember that scene from the movie, but it's got to be a nudist colony. And that's it. You know what I mean? Telegraphing the joke is sometimes the right thing to do.
What does he say to that guy at the front desk who says yes?
I can't remember.
I can't remember the question. I didn't write it down because I was laughing too hard. I thought it was so funny.
But it's great because, the audience is in on the joke before Clouseau is, and that's a great position to be in for comedy. He's very much behind the 8 ball here. But also, I mean, this is where you feel, like, up to this point, it doesn't necessarily feel like a 1960s movie. It felt like, it's a movie that could have been made in the 50s just as easily. But once you get to the nudist colony, it's like, okay, so... We're addressing the counterculture here. This is the comedy of culture and generation classes at this point. This is kind of Blake
and
Edwards
aren't we
speaking to?
Aren't we dipping a bit into French farce?
Well, with the nudity.
Yeah, just like that feel of it.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think. Well, once he's kind of covering his nudity with the guitar, to me, it's a straight line from here to Austin Powers.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the same exact gag, and the even the period of film comedy that it's based on.
And it's funny you mentioned that because we recently did Dr. No, and you talked about on the Patreon, and I remember you talking about the direct references that
don't let these skinflints know that. They don't deserve to know that. They gotta pay for that information.
I care about the regular listeners too.
That's not what you said off mic.
That can't be verified. Just
unless
trust me,
I was
everyone.
recording it. No.
But I it just reminded me of I think Mike Myers was drawing on more than one thing, and as I was watching this scene play out,
well, yeah,
I immediately went to Austin Powers.
Completely, and I think the kind of a comic actor that Mike Myers is sort of based on the prototype of Peter Sellers, and not just him, but to some extent Steve Martin obviously ends up playing Clouseau, but there are other overlaps too. Steve Coogan, I think, one of the great missed opportunities was casting him as Peter Sellers in The Life and Death of Peter Sellers. I don't know how that ended up being Jeffrey Rush because Steve Coogan auditioned for it and didn't get it.
Wow.
So that he the kind of a comedic actor he was is influential on several future generations of comic artists, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Even lowly little old me, like, you know, I think about Peter whenever I've done kind of performances where I have to play more than one character, or doing a lot of physical comedy. You know, the first thing I think of is Peter Sellers.
Sure.
Like, the first thing foremost in my mind is, like, you know, can I steal anything from Peter Sellers here?
Or
and I usually
I think of it in terms of how simple can I make the bit?
Yeah, that's his genius. There's a clarity to his comedy that is kind of unmatched.
Mm-hmm.
I think with comic actors, you never a sense that you don't know what the joke is supposed to be.
Right.
Jerry Lewis is another one who's very good at that, but I don't think as good as Peter Sellers. I think, and funnier, and Peter Sellers is funnier than Jerry Lewis, just to be perfectly frank.
Just to be clear.
But it's kind of, you know, like, to me, it's like Jerry Lewis is Chaplin, and Peter Sellers is Buster Keaton. Like, Buster Keaton,
right?
Like Chaplin's got everything in his arsenal to do comic acting, but he's not actually funny.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Buster Keaton is one of the funniest men that ever walked the earth, and I kind of feel the same. Like, I see all of what Peter Sellers does in Jerry Lewis's comedy, but it never actually makes me laugh.
Yeah, right.
So sometimes it's a matter of taste.
I like also that they take the time in the middle of this nudist colony to go back to George Sanders' country house, and they find another dead body. He's in the middle of saying, I think the gardener, or the gardener they found at the, did they find the gardener? Is that who Elke had the
shears,
the shears with?
Mm-hmm.
So who fell out of the closet when George Sanders says, well, this person can verify it, and then they fall out of the closet dead?
I don't remember. I've written down that line.
He could have verified it.
Yeah, I don't remember who that is, though.
It's very funny. But all of that is just to get to them stuck in traffic in the nude after they have escaped the nudist colony, and then the button on that last arrested joke.
Oh.
With all the cops looking in the window, to me, is just comedy perfection.
It goes against received wisdom of the rule of three, right? Sometimes you can...
Because it was 4.
Sometimes you can make it 4, and it's just as funny.
Yep.
If you do it right, there's no reason why you can't do it 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
I think this car jam, this is what I mean about which way is the James Bond influence working here, because this is what all this set piece is like. This is what all Bond films would eventually become, right? This is how the tone of the, you know, the chase scenes in Moonraker and For Your Eyes Only are just like this. So I think it's interesting. I think in this, it's like Bond films become more like Pink Panther films, rather than the other way around. It's interesting to me as well, and this, you know, to give you skinflints a little taste of the good life. We also talked about this on our Dr. No episode, the paralleling of protagonist and antagonist.
Yeah, right.
The parallels between Dreyfus and Clouseau become apparently clear. They're both arrogant, know-it-all detectives who inflict slapstick accidents on themselves.
Right.
It's just that one of them, you know, is doing it, like Clouseau is doing that without self-knowledge, whereas, Dreyfus is...
Yes, right.
It's all happening, you know, it's all... He's aware of what's happening and he just can't stop it.
Yeah, he's already cut off his thumb.
Right. And this movie has some dark turns, and this is one of them, I think, where he's just... It's like... Yeah, you just lost a limb there. I mean, that's...
Yeah. Well, not a limb, but, you know, a piece of an appendage.
An appendage,
sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
An appendage. We need thumbs to do stuff as people. I to be honest, I didn't track whether his thumb comes back, but I expect it does. I expect it regrows for the beginning of Return of the Panther. Like other aspects of his pre-shot in the dark personality just seem to.
But I
back.
also like, because I think after the nudist arrest, Clouseau's getting dressed down in his office, right?
Yeah.
by Dreyfus, and I love every time he's getting dressed down by Dreyfus, he has this sort of non-committal air about him that says, "Of
Absolutely.
course, why would I have known about this? I did not know."
Because
Even if it's handing a bag of money over to the thieves leaving a bank because he just saw them drop it on the ground, you know?
It's that lack of self-awareness that allows us to warm to him as a character, I think, because, you know, he's incredibly arrogant and egotistical.
Right.
You know, there's all those photos of him with like major political figures in his apartment.
That painting, I can't remember which movie it's in, but that painting of him with with his shirt off in a boxing pose really got me.
So he's not lovable. I think the reason we warm to him is that he clearly has no awareness of what a buffoon he is. Like that gives us sympathy and pity for him. It also, and because Dreyfus is the opposite of that, it also makes us despise Dreyfus more. So
it raises him in our esteem, right?
Yeah. We're the kind of bystander, you know, we're the bystander who's like, you know, aren't you being a little hard on him, kind of?
Yeah, right.
We don't take Dreyfus's point of view on Clouseau, which is remarkable given that, you know, substantially everything Dreyfus thinks about Clouseau is absolutely correct. But
yeah, right. That's the best part of the relationship is that technically he is correct about Clouseau.
But we never turn on Clouseau.
But we don't turn on him. And despite the fact that Clouseau will say something after getting dressed down in his office, he'll say something like, "And another thing," but the door has been closed on him. And so his arm goes through the window. But it's right after that Dreyfus stabs himself with his letter opener. Mm-hmm. And he's got to go back to hospital. And you feel bad. You're constantly kind of feeling bad for Clouseau. You never feel bad for Dreyfus.
It's true. And I think this is, you know, this is where this is the Britishness of it. Like, you know, we all our sitcoms have these characters like David Brent and Basil Fawlty and Alan Partridge, these fairly reprehensible people who somehow we never quite turn against as an audience. And I think it's a peculiarly British thing to have these kind of anti-heroic protagonists who you don't necessarily like, but you don't dislike and turn against either. And I think Peter Sellers is leading the line here, because Clouseau isn't, you know, he's not as lovable as Stan Laurel or even Oliver Hardy with all their shit, with all their personality shit. Sure. But so, you know, but at the same time, there's like with David Brent and Alan Partridge, there's a lack of self-awareness that makes them somewhat likable, even though outwardly what they're doing is reprehensible.
Makes sense.
That's not, that might be something that's unique to us as a culture as well.
Well, and then we get another Cato attack.
Yes.
And this is
Cato's attack. Just to remind myself.
Just so that I know.
Yeah.
This is the moment where this is the moment where I noticed the painting. He has that painting of him, sort of karate pants, but no shirt, just muscled, standing like a boxer. Oh, it's very good.
And there's a few kind of satirical jokes in this section. We've got the whole psychotherapist bit, which feels very modern, and the joke about the Christian Science Monitor reporting. And it feels like, you know, we're trying to catch up with the modern world a little bit.
Yeah, right.
As we did with the nudist colony, I guess. And then we're straight into flamenco, which
I
think the restraint they have not to turn this into a slapstick set piece defies logic,
right?
It defies logic. It's admirable, because I was like, oh, what you're doing is actually kind of a Hitchcockian use of a set piece.
Yes, because we get so many different assassination attempts.
Yeah. It's actually dark humor that we're going for here, because various people die as collateral damage for the attempts on Clouseau's life in the course of the next couple of scenes. It's an interest, like the movie has these kind of very dark alleyways that it keeps going into, and it's when you least expect it. I was sure that, I mean, maybe I'm conditioned having watched Pink Panther 2 that flamenco is automatically going to turn into bad slapstick, but
Right.
here it really doesn't.
Here it sings.
It's just purely suspense purposes.
Right.
So
Silencer
that's quite
attack,
something.
knife attack, blow darts, poison.
Yeah. So I guess that's a really it's a really interesting sequence tonally.
Hmm. But again, it doesn't feel out of bounds, doesn't? Like
No,
doesn't it?
no,
you
no,
know, I mean,
because the
Blake
movie can
Edwards
go both
knows how
ways.
to
Mhm.
bring something that dark,
Yeah.
but you know, it's that guy off to the side saying, "Keep it light, keep it."
Yeah.
He manages to keep it light.
Well, I don't even think they care about keeping it light as long as it's funny.
Yeah, right.
So you can get.
Well, that's what I
super
mean by
dark.
keeping it light.
You can
is
get
keeping
super
it funny.
dark as long as it's fun. You can get super
Yeah.
dark as long as it's funny.
Right.
It's like, you know, it's. I think that's where Blake Edwards is interesting. Like he actually, if you look at his whole film career, which eventually we'll find out about in future episodes,
Yes.
other than the 8 Pink Panther movies, which he apparently directed, is that he never really steered away from difficult subjects. Sometimes to his detriment, right? Like
Sometimes,
Victor
yeah,
Victoria,
right.
You know, like you got into the trans issue way too early, for it to be you know, watchable for modern eyes. But at the same time, I kind of admire that sense of like nothing's off limits
Mhm.
in comedy, even serial murder. Well, that's what I mean. That what else? I mean, I was
No,
really
you're right.
surprised that these people were actually dead. I thought like there would be a buyback of it at some point, but
No.
there isn't. And
That
to find
last
out that it's
flamenco
Dreyfus
dancer-
behind it all.
Goes wide-eyed and falls straight down from the poison.
I mean, it's quite a subversive move. I mean, you're doing it within the kind of umbrella of comedy, but it's quite a subversive move in 1964 to make the, you know, your police chief, you know, a serial murderer by the end of the movie.
I don't
Which is
think.
probably why they walked it back, but at the same
Yeah.
time, they turned him into Blofeld. So
Yeah, right.
clearly, they're not averse to this kind of.
There was an ending in
subversion.
sight, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah.
I tell you what, why don't we take another break? Because a bomb's about to go off.
Oh, it sure is.
In the movie.
Oh, okay.
I don't mean.
You're gonna
I don't
reveal
mean I
to
need
me
to go
that-
to the bathroom. I just mean in the movie, a bomb's about to go off.
Ah, you always got to bring it down to that.
That's where I live, my friend.
In the toilet, like Monk. You're continually investigating a toilet.
All right. We'll be right back. Does the coronavirus have you feeling oogie? Have you been sitting on your couch for weeks? Nay, have you been sitting on there for months? Well, it's time for you to get back in shape. Check out 2AT Fitness. You can find them on Instagram. You can find them on Facebook. 2AT Fitness was started by Tina Bernard. She is ready and raring to go to help you get back into the shape you want to get into. They've got all kinds of classes. They've got outdoor in-person classes. They've got online classes if that's what you prefer. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to get back in shape. You're going to find a variety of exercises. You're going to have strength training, cardio, weightlifting, even fun 5-minute burnouts that will push you to your limits. So get off the couch, get into shape. Go ahead and check out 2AT Fitness. Tina Bernard has got you for all your needs. I know her personally. She's fantastic. You're not going to meet a better person to help you become the new you. Check it out. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Well, a series of serial murders have happened. And we come back and it's time for Hanky Panky. That doesn't
Oh,
mean
yeah.
our two lead characters aren't in the mood for love.
No, not at all.
Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, it's a perfect comedic storm here. Drunk acting,
Mm-hmm.
inept sex scenes, and slapstick violence.
Right.
Doesn't get any better than that.
Because we have another Kato attack.
And this is great. This is great because I mean it's also rule of three, but
Well, you'd think. But
yeah,
again,
but it's almost it's like,
we've already said you can do it 4 times.
Yeah, you've already said you can do it 4 times anyway. But the murder plot kind of makes you forget that this is obviously what's gonna happen.
Yeah,
Kato
right.
is gonna like you're lured into a false sense of security.
Of security.
That this isn't absolutely what's gonna happen next. Because you're focusing on some other aspect of the movie, but then you're like, of course it's gonna be Kato, of course. Because this is his flat, and this is what happens in his flat. He gets attacked by a small Chinese man.
There's something within every Kato attack that really gets me too, and it's the idea of his of Kato's not professionalism, but sort of his deep-seated respect for trying to keep Clouseau. It's like he looks at this as his job.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, yeah.
I really love it.
I do. Against my better judgment, enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I have a note here that there's a newspaper joke that is how the gag in The Last Crusade should have been played. I don't quite remember it, but I remember it in the context of The Last Crusade. There's like, you think it's them hiding behind newspapers, and it turns out it's not, but they are kind of in the background reading newspapers. So you're like, the joke only works if
the German does have to put his stick, his little baton, on Connery's paper and lower it.
This is at the airport before they get on the blimp.
Yeah. No, they're on the blimp.
No, they're not yet. They're getting their tickets. So the scene begins, and you see 2 people hiding behind what look like they're hiding behind newspapers. And you assume it's them. They pulled the newspapers down, and it would have been funny if they walked into shot, like they just walked into a different part of the shot. But they are in the shot just elsewhere and reading newspapers. So it's like Steven Spielberg doesn't know how to do comedy, but this movie does.
Heard. Now I have a note here that says Dreyfuss does some explaining, but I don't remember what that is. Is he explaining all the murders that
all
he
the people
just committed?
he's murdered, yes.
Right?
Yeah. Well,
he's very upset that in his mind Clouseau has caused the murder of innocent people by not getting murdered himself.
We've got the amazing synchronized watches sequence as well in the middle of all this.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, we should say we keep saying Dreyfuss is the murderer. We're not seeing this. This is kept secret from the audience because you never see his face until the end.
But it's him. But we find out it's him who did it.
Yeah.
I mean, at one point we didn't know O.J. Simpson was a murderer, but we can.
No, I'm just saying for those that haven't seen the movie but have chosen for whatever reason to listen to this podcast.
I don't think it falls into spoiler territory, given that it's a movie from 1964.
1964.
And it's a comedy. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I thought that you were trying to kind of counter-argue that maybe he didn't do it. Maybe he was set up. I was like, no, definitely not. He definitely did it.
Not at all.
That would make more sense for the next movie, but he really did kill all those people. Yeah.
And I mean, it was before those murders happened. Again, it was one of those things where I thought to myself, in this particular movie, I think I just remembered. It was long before the series of murders happened at the flamenco bar where I said, oh yeah, it's Dreyfuss. And that was more of a memory.
I forgot he turned homicidal this early. That was, along with not expecting Kato till the 70s, this was another. I didn't expect Dreyfuss to be bad Dreyfuss until the 70s.
Yeah.
Which would have made more sense, because they have to retcon it in the next movie just to get him back to being chief again, to play him off Sellers. I say the next movie, that's wishful thinking, obviously. But you know what I mean. The next Sellers
It's
movie.
not the next movie.
But yeah, the synchronized watches and also the way that plays in with the turning the light off when announcing the murderer, which is a staple of the
very
mystery
funny.
genre as well, isn't
Yeah.
it? That like, you turn the light off and reveal the murderer. So it's like taking apart the cliches of the thriller genre comedically in a really fun way, I think.
And they switch watches, right? Doesn't he get Clouseau's watch, and then that watch stops, and he has to call him?
Yeah, exactly.
So funny.
And the idea of, I don't know if it was a cliche at this time, but let's synchronize our watches, in action movies. I mean, maybe it's in like Guns of the Navarone or something like that they're thinking about. But it's another staple of the thriller genre, isn't it? The idea of synchronizing your watches, so to build this sequence around them not being able to get exactly the same time on their watches, I think is hilarious.
Right. And then we're kind of back into physical comedy form because you're watching Sellers try to explain to everybody involved in this murder mystery what's going on. But meanwhile, he's stepping on their feet. He's knocking over tables.
Yeah.
He's
very
astounded
stage
that
fast,
somebody would
like-
clean up
Yep.
the mess that he just created. It's like, you're not listening to me.
And Blake Edwards knows when to play the stage farce. Because
Yeah.
in these scenes, he's just gently moving the camera side to side so it captures everything that's happening. He's not interrupting the flow of the live comedy,
Right.
which is good comedic direction. I think you've got to know when to just hold back as well as when to do an edit or when to move the camera. It's kind of interesting as well because I don't know if the movie knows this, but it acts like everyone in the room has been our ensemble, but we've barely seen any of these people. It's all been
Yeah, exactly.
it's been all been Clouseau, and it's kind of funny that I wonder how much of their stuff is in the original stage play, how much of it is taken out, so that you can have Clouseau in various different comedic set
because of the
pieces.
6 people that start arguing with each other about
Yeah.
who did what and who they did it to and with, and we're talking in terms of sex and killing, that kind of thing. George is like really the only person you know, and everybody else feels like a stranger to the audience, right?
Yeah.
But within that moment, and I referenced it earlier, when they all start admitting all their murders out loud, and to see Peter Sellers, how he's there to explain the murder to everyone, and to see the surprise and shock on his face as they all are doing that, and then when he turns and looks down the barrel of the camera, that, I mean, there are very few times where that works, and for me,
That's true.
it was pitched at just the right moment, and I'll credit Blake Edwards again because that's one of the funniest down the barrel looks I've ever seen on film. It was really that funny to me.
And it's funny as well, exactly the timing of it, the context of it, but also the tradition it speaks to, which is the breaking the fourth wall in the classic comic tradition of Oliver Hardy, like his exasperated looks at camera. That's what we're channeling here. So it's you're right. It's one of the few instances in. I don't have a big problem. I don't have as big a problem with it as everyone else does. As On Her Majesty's Secret Service is my favorite Bond film, of course. And, that movie begins with breaking the fourth wall, but the tradition it speaks to there, and the restraint as well of only doing it this once, not making it a recurring bit. Just having it's this one-off moment where he just looks down the camera and acknowledges the audience for a second, and we go right back into the action.
We'll take the breaking of the rule of 3 for both the arresting police car and Kato attacks.
Yeah,
because restraint here.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because it feels like there's a kind of Python-esque energy about the movie from this point onwards, because the cast jumps into the car and then goes off screen and gets blown up, which feels like something that would happen in a Python movie.
Pretty fucking dark.
Yeah,
it's
it's kind of anarchic comedy, just a little bit before its time.
Yeah,
almost. I mean, I mean, Peter Sellers has already done this on radio with the Goons, which was a kind of comedy troupe. Him, Spike Milligan, and Harry Secombe, and they pioneered the kind of surrealist comedy that that the Pythons would eventually pick up and run with, and you know, make internationally famous. But it all started with Peter Sellers in the Goon Show.
Okay.
On radio, and even their recurring catchphrase was "He's fallen in the water." So I can't help thinking that that's speaking to the Goons fans in the audience all the times he falls in the water in this and later movies as well.
Yeah, there's a pretty big moat scene coming up in the last of these movies.
Oh, that moat, yes. Oh, that moat scene. Yeah, the last third of the movie is a moat scene. Yeah, and then the kind of, you know, the sort of like, without speeding up the footage, it feels like they're speeding up the movie at this point, because we get the, you know, the cast get in the car and they all blow up, and then, you know, we get the kiss.
Dreyfus becomes a rabid dog.
Yeah. We get a kiss between the two lovers, Kato attacks, and then they all fall in the water, and it's like the culmination of all the running comedic and romantic storylines across the movie in one fell swoop.
Yeah, right.
And the perfect, you know, the perfect ending to this movie, you know, and then they fade out on that, on the fights, on Kato attacking him in the water. So it's kind of like that fade out, you know, it gives the audience that residual sublime moment of comedy.
Right.
Before the movie's over. And it's over pretty quick. It's the final punchline, because it's
yeah, that's it.
We get a handful of credits and
I was going to say, good luck on your credit check.
I only got one note. So of all the ways that the characters are described in the credits, the actor Fred Hugh is described as balding customer.
I can relate.
And I can only imagine how like no one else is given a description like this in the cast list. Like they're either a character's name or what their job is. He's the only one who's balding customer. Imagine how shocked that actor must have been to find out that this is how they identified him in the crowd.
Oh man, he probably took it.
And that's it. I mean, I would, but
it's like I'm in a great movie. I don't care.
It's all Yeah, I know. It's all relative though, because no one else is given like a physical description like that. It's all the job they do or the character's name.
And that's it. Yeah.
That's my solo credit note.
Yeah, there's not a lot of credits for these movies.
No, I mean, it's 64 movies ended when the movie ended.
Right.
As it should be.
Agreed. I don't need to know who was your COVID people.
Oh, I definitely don't need to know that, and I don't need to know who worked in marketing around the movie.
Yes, right.
Not of the movie, but worked for the people who did the marketing for the movie.
I don't care who's the VP of production at New Line or Village Roadshow. These people mean nothing to me. Any last thoughts about A Shot in the Dark, sir?
I don't think so. Its brilliance is self-evident. It almost does.
Yeah.
It's almost a shame to talk about it, but you know, it's a no-brainer really of how well this works.
To me, you know, if somebody comes to you and poses the question, what is comedy? It feels like one of those things that should be easy to describe, but upon being tasked with it is difficult.
Yeah, right.
And to me, the answer is this movie. This movie is what comedy is in its bones, you know? And
in its bones,
there's not a lot of movies you can say that about.
Yeah. In its bones and also in its entirety.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is the. I
mean, you mentioned the 7 sort of disciplines of comedy that Peter Sellers brings to the movie, but that means
Definitely.
the movie has those disciplines of comedy.
Exactly.
The movie
And-
is flexing each of those muscles as well, and
Hmm.
so there you have. In that sense, you have to give all credit to Blake Edwards.
Well, yeah, and you've got a director in Blake Edwards who knows how to handle each of those styles of comedy as well.
Yeah.
It's just remarkable that Peter Sellers can code switch between them all, within the same scene, within the same line, within the same movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't really have more to say about it than that, except that I guess probably this doesn't get credit as being a great sequel,
Right.
but it probably
Or
should.
a great movie.
And it's an early sequel as well. I mean,
Sure.
the in terms of sequels, it's not the earliest film we've ever done, because we've done some 1960 films for Patreon, but is it the earliest sequel we've ever done?
I think it is.
I think it is. So, and we haven't really talked about that, and maybe it's what we should have been talking about all along. But
So this whole time.
this whole time, instead of how funny we found Kato jumping out of something, but it's too tempting not to. But the art of sequel cinema is, I mean, it's not it's in its infancy at this
Mhm.
point. So this movie must have, I think, shown people a certain direction you can take a film series.
Yeah, it's certainly a light to follow down
Yeah.
a tunnel.
And the idea of kind of consolidating your sequel around a particular, at this point, character,
Character, right.
and have that be your kind of driving force for future films.
And it's interesting in that way because Clouseau's not necessarily, he's not the focus of that first movie.
Right. So it is a spin-off. It is Frasier, essentially.
Right.
And like Frasier, it might be better than the original.
The original.
Not that, well, that's a debate for another time, but let's just say the Cheers, and there's a discussion to be had about whether Frasier is better than Cheers and vice versa.
Yeah, but what an entertaining conversation that would be.
Sure.
Not for this podcast, I suppose, but
No. Well,
can we
it's
do
a sequel
sequels to
of sorts.
television shows?
Well, it's a sequel of sorts, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Frasier has had a sequel to itself as well,
Right.
which I have not
Did you watch it?
or will never watch. No.
Okay.
I
I watched half of one episode and I just am reminded that I never felt the need to go back.
My heart is not strong enough, I think, to take it.
Yeah.
But
All right. Well, let's leave it there then.
Leslie. But yeah,
On that
I
sad
feel
Frasier note.
well, on that sad Frasier note, but also the fact that we may have been burying the lead for the entire episode, and we should have talking about how
Right,
this
which is to say this might be the earliest sequel
created the
we've
language
ever-
of sequel
Yeah.
cinema. But
Yeah.
I guess the fact that it feels so effortless speaks for itself.
Right.
That it doesn't. None of it feels forced, and it's a sequel from 1964. That says a lot.
Says a lot for the movie, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Check it out, people. If you haven't already.
It's on Max for who knows how long.
Yeah, we got to try to get to those next 4 at some point.
Wouldn't that be hilarious if we just end up doing those 4 without a break after all this? You know what? I think we should do it fairly soon, though.
I do too. I don't want them to
we
leave.
should. I don't think we should wait on it. I
don't think we should wait a
see-
year.
But then I see the screen grab of Roberto Benigni, and I think it's not going to end well.
No, yeah. It's not going to end like it started.
No.
I'll tell you that much. It won't be a bookend of greatness situation.
There's an Oscar they gave to a comedy film, and all they had to do was make it all about the Holocaust.
Yeah, it just had to be Holocaust related.
So that's it. All Wes Anderson has to do is involve genocide of some kind in his.
And then you too, sir, can win an Oscar.
And I would argue genocide is a part of Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Absolutely. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the first of these sequels for Clouseau. Coming up next,
Oh, dear Lord.
you're going to have to listen to us to believe us. You can find the movie on Tubi if you liked, but we are talking Inspector Clouseau. Boy, will that be fun.
We are going to utter phrases that will have never been said before and will never be said again about
Probably.
the things that happen in that movie.
Yep. In the meantime, tell us what you think of A Shot in the Dark. Find us on Facebook. Find us on Instagram. You cannot find us on Twitter, apparently. We're all done with that.
Which is
We've been
good for the
locked out.
world.
Yeah.
I feel like it's the
Sorry,
it's the sort
not
of-
Twitter. X.
It's the social media equivalent of carbon offsetting.
If you can't find us there, send an email to everythingsequel@gmail.com. Tell us what you think of A Shot in the Dark. We're unreserved fans. Love this movie. It's fantastic.
It's a joy.
All right. His name is Tom Stewart. He's from Lonesome Whistle Productions. I'm Michael Shantz. I'm from the How Dare You Awards. Like I said, when you hear us next, we're talking Inspector Clouseau. Stand up and be heard. Report for duty.